Hello, everyone. Welcome to another insightful episode of Inago's podcast, Research and Beyond, an interactive podcast series that explores the latest advances in the field of STM industry. My name is Dr. KK, or the full name is Dr. Krishna Kumar Venkitachalam. I'm the Innovation Officer at Inago and your host for today's session. And I have with me for this episode themed Reimagining Peer Review in the Age of AI, Dr. David Green, a wildlife ecologist and the founder of Stacks Journal. Hello, David, and welcome to the podcast.
Hey, KK, thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Excellent. So before we go ahead, for the listeners who are tuning in on YouTube and or LinkedIn, please subscribe to our channel. And if you enjoy the content, share it with your colleagues. And we would also like to have you share feedback on social media platforms. Just search for Inago or Research and Beyond on Spotify, YouTube, and LinkedIn. So with that housekeeping out of the way, so David, I've been snooping around. So I've done some background research before our conversation. So I'm aware that you're the founder of the Stacks Journal, and it has focused on rethinking how peer review and editorial processes can be made more transparent, efficient, and equitable. And also, when I looked at your LinkedIn profile, I'm sure that I'm convinced that you are about to bring in a unique perspective at the intersection of research, technology, and publishing. And I'm sure that you'll have some actionable recommendations to our listeners in terms of how they should approach peer review. So, could you add some more detail to this, because this sounds like my research, but I would like to hear it from your voice, in your voice. Yeah.
Yeah, totally. Well, I think it all comes back to peer review, right? And I think as people that are listening to this podcast know, peer review it's the best tool that we have to
Mm.
distinguish science we can trust from science that is biased, misleading, or inaccurate, right? And it is like the foundation of scientific knowledge, and it helps us make sure that the information that we are creating or generating is vetted, right, and
Right.
is credible. But it's been breaking down, right? And I don't want to take up all of the podcast because there are so many reasons why it is breaking down
Right.
that people are probably pretty familiar with. But
Yeah.
it's currently designed for profits by big publishers, right, and not by scientists.
Hmm.
And so it's wildly expensive. It can take as much energy and as much information from reviewers as possible,
Right.
and also really focuses on only publishing the splashiest of research, right? And so there's a lot of big problems, right?
Yeah.
Um, and at Stacks Journal, like we're really trying to rethink how we do peer review
Right.
to make it work for this modern era and allow us to actually publish all of that good research.
Right, right. Interesting. You brought up a couple of things that I'm passionate about. One is the maybe we should go away from the for-profit science publishing model to a science-led. I think read an article earlier this week, and the second thing is I guess you mentioned the sort of incentivization of peer review, and the fact that you need to have negative science also published, right? And that's something that I think
Mm-hmm.
we are going to cover later on in the episode. So I have when I thought about this podcast, I thought there are two key questions that I think we are trying to address here. So is peer review keeping up with the rapid pace of technological change? And you can think of AI, if that's a simple sort of a broad word that everybody likes to throw in. And
Mm-hmm.
with AI, which is often viewed as a disruptive force, could it actually help us reimagine and improve the peer review process? So those are our central questions, David, and we'll also explore some of the other things that you mentioned, including, I think, reproducibility, negative publishing, and maybe non for profit peer review. So let's start with setting the stage for a listener, maybe somebody who's not so familiar with peer review. So what are some of the traditional challenges and some of the modern complications that the technology brings? So traditional challenges in peer review, I'm aware of things like, for example, reviewer bias, some quality issues, volumes are big, and the editors, publishers, everybody's trying to keep up with it. And we also are thinking about accessibility, diversity, inclusivity, and everything. So could you share some of your thoughts on these challenges and maybe some complications that technology brings?
Yeah, totally. I think that peer review, has been used for hundreds of years, right? But has remarkably been unchanged,
Right.
right? In the systems that were laid out, early on in the Royal Society, almost by accident, are now still the exact same systems that we have, which is, you have some anonymous, you have an associate editor, an editor determining what research is splashy that should
Mhm.
go out to peer review. And then you have two anonymous reviewers who work in complete isolation,
Right.
determining their own, opinions of that research. Um, and this can lead, as you mentioned, to a ton of bias, right?
Mm-hmm.
You have single people, you have often one person determining the fate of an article, whether or not that's good science or whether it should be published. And we know that there's a ton of inherent biases there, right?
Right.
And so what I think is really important for us to be thinking about is how can we create a more diverse reviewer pool? How
Mm.
can we bring more voices into this peer review process?
Right.
And one of the things that I really love at Stacks Journal is that our peer review process is built around collaboration. So we actually
Right.
bring together a handful of reviewers. We average about 5 reviewers for every article,
Right.
and they actually collaborate on the peer review process, right?
Right.
They can see each other's feedback, they can interact with each other,
Mm-hmm.
and that helps create a more, a stronger peer review because you're bringing in all these different backgrounds.
Right.
And then to reduce that bias, we actually have them vote on whether or not the article should be published, right? So you don't have one single editor or one single reviewer determining the fate of an article. It really needs to be a consensus from that community. And so, this collaborative model of peer review
Mm.
can actually fix some of these issues that you've mentioned of like reviewer fatigue, or these biases, because it actually makes peer review exciting and
Mm-hmm.
engaging, and people actually want to do it, right? And so like I think one of the other common concerns that people have about the status of peer review is that it's becoming harder and harder to find reviewers, right?
Right.
Like if every editor I've talked to, every associate editor I've talked to says like we can't find reviewers, and we're sending out dozens and dozens of review requests. And at Stacks Journal, we actually haven't found that to be the case,
Right.
because what we found is that when you create a peer review process that people actually like, they're happy to do it. I
Mm-hmm.
think scientists were trained to discuss new science, we're trained to think critically and to determine, are there holes in this finding? Is there something that we really need to be thinking about? And so we actually like doing it. And so at Stacks, we actually give researchers the modern tools that they need to discuss the research. So they actually enjoy it. They keep coming back time and time again. And we've actually had reviewers talk about our peer review process as being fun and
Mm-hmm.
refreshing, which are like words that I don't think I've ever heard people say about peer review.
Yes.
And so I think that there's for a lot of editors and for a lot of publishers, there's a bit of a scarcity mindset when it
Mm.
comes to peer review, right? And
Right.
that's because they're only experiencing these challenges.
Right.
But I think at Stacks, we're really trying to rebuild the entire ecosystem to make it work again and to create that energy around peer review and get people really excited to do it again.
Wow, that's a lot of information that I'm trying to process. So you mentioned the it's a voluntary, obviously, like every other peer review system, it's a voluntary thing. But also there are you mentioned two. I think many journals also use three reviewers, and these are
Mhm.
blinded. In this case, I'm expecting Stacks five reviewers, non-blinded, and they are able to vote for the review. Is that how it is?
Yeah. No, let me clarify. Yeah. So in Stacks, it's all double blind, right? So
Okay.
you bring a handful of reviewers, about 5 for every article, and they actually can see each other's comments in
Right.
real time. So they're
Right.
actually creating a discussion. People have likened it to like a grad school seminar,
Right.
but and having that meet peer review.
Right.
So they actually see each other's comments, but they don't know who each other
Okay.
are.
Okay.
So
Okay.
they're
Okay.
really, really focused on that information and discussion. And so it's been really exciting. We see reviewers agree, we see reviewers disagree, we see them like really have the discussion around the
Right.
science. And what's amazing is at the end of that process, the authors get a much stronger
Mm.
paper, because it's not just like, reviewers working in isolation. You're
Right.
actually having them a discussion around the science. And in addition to that, one of the other challenges in peer review is that in current systems, right, is because reviewers are working in isolation, you often get conflicting reports, right? We've all had the issue of reviewer one and then reviewer
Mm.
two, who says something completely different. And then it's up to you as the author to, make sense of all of that.
Right.
But at Stacks, what's really interesting is that because they're having that discussion around the peer review, the reviewers are actually able to talk to each other.
Right.
They actually sort a lot of that out, and make it really easy for authors to respond to those questions and comments.
Right, excellent. So, some follow-up thoughts on this. So, you mentioned a platform or some tools that you give the reviewers. So, is that Does that cover any assistance in the context of AI assisting them maybe to source or surface things that they may find it difficult, or for any other purposes? Do you use any sort of AI assistance? And what are your thoughts on this in general, AI assistance? Yeah,
Yeah, totally. So at Stacks Journal, we do not have any AI assistants right now.
right,
And we do this for a few reasons. I think the biggest thing right now is that we don't believe that AI is really capable of sound scientific judgment. We think that it can really help fix grammar or check for plagiarism or errors in data, things like that. But at Stacks, we really don't believe it can evaluate science.
hmm,
And so, I think that there are lots of places that are integrating AI in peer review, in that I have like some deep concerns about.
right,
And I actually recently wrote an article for the Scholarly Kitchen about the dangers of non-peer reviewed science.
right,
And actually, one of the biggest comments or most common comments that I got in response to that were people feeling very nervous about the use of AI
yeah,
and large language models in peer review, and trying
uh-huh,
to really understand how they're training them, right? Are they using non-peer reviewed science? What information are they pulling in to
right,
create those peer review reports?
right,
And so we don't have AI integration at Stacks right now.
hmm,
Um, and I think it could be useful for things like fixing grammar or plagiarism, which are things that do happen in peer review.
right,
We've
right,
gone through peer review multiple dozens of times at this point, and that is an important part of the peer review process, is having reviewers help improve that research and help make that
right,
article stronger and sound better and all of those things.
right.
And so I do see that there is an opening for AI integration there, but I don't believe it should be assessing the quality of the science.
So the thing is, I think I would have to disagree with some of this, but let's have a conversation about it. So one
Mm-hmm.
before that, you mentioned the Scholarly Kitchen article. It did, if I forget that I saw your name, but I'm sure that I've read it. So did
Yeah.
you bring up preprints and their potential lack of quality and dissemination of pseudoscience and misinformation? Yeah, so that was the thesis of the yeah, right.
Yeah.
So in my opinion, what AI would stand for in terms of, let's say, improving language, grammar correction, and everything. So those are the traditional, let's say, AI. I'm using AI broadly, but we are talking about different types of AI. So I'm using broadly AI. Those were the traditional tools which we have been using for a long time. I mean, it's like, for example, spell check, right, in Microsoft
Mm-hmm.
Word. It has been with us for decades, and nobody questions whether it is useful or not. We just seem to use it. So in the last maybe 4 years or so, since things have changed in terms of large language models and everything, so they have some additional capabilities, which especially with, I guess you're aware of the reasoning models and the more larger models with with some guidelines and instructions, guardrails to specific instructions, and to choose the right model and use techniques such as retrieval augmented generation, the capability of an AI to help a human peer reviewer do their review better, not letting the AI decide everything for themselves, but having 100% human oversight, is such a ripe possibility considering all the challenges that we have. And that is so I work with with our product team to work on our own AI peer review assistant, and we are hoping to address some of these challenges. I mean, some of the things that you brought up in your article and as well as in the response before, some of these things. So I'm excited to talk about it. But before I get there, so some of the things in general the community is talking about in terms of using technology would be to maybe find better reviewers, like match the reviewer to the paper in terms of efficiency, because you are the gray area in between editorial desk responsibilities and peer reviewer responsibilities. So a lot of things, for example, we are talking about paper mills and all sorts of research integrity concerns. And apart from that, young researchers, young, I guess, peer reviewers also, I guess, would use some mentoring, and this can be obviously through a human, but also there are several research papers. I'd love to share some of these with you, and these are on archive, another preprint server, so we will talk about that. But about modern technology to assist a young reviewer do reviews more, let's say, with more robustness, more quality. So, what are your thoughts on this? As in, do you still agree at your current sort of position? Do you think that AI not the large language models themselves, not necessarily. Think of all sorts of technology. Can uh, publishers and maybe journals integrate it responsibility with the right guardrails to maybe flag research integrity concerns and just help reviewers and mentor young reviewers? What are your thoughts on this?
Hmm. Yeah, I mean, I think that this is all still, it's such a new and exciting world that's being created, right? And I think that AI definitely has some promise, right?
Yeah.
And I think like for us, we need to be asking the question of like, how can it make the science better, right?
Hmm.
I think
Hmm.
that the whole goal of peer review is to, make sure that research is credible, but then
Hmm.
how to make it shine the best that
Right.
it can,
Right.
right?
Right. Right.
We know that all research has limitations. We understand that there are drawbacks for any finding, right?
Hmm.
And that the conclusions need to be limited and not overreach, right? And so I think a lot of that happens in peer review already. We certainly see that in our collaborative peer reviews at Stacks. And I think when we try to imagine the best ways to integrate AI, we should be coming from that perspective, right?
Right.
We should be
Right.
coming from the perspective like, how can we use this to make the science
Hmm.
better?
Right.
Um, and I think the biggest question that I have, right, is with all of these AI is like, how are we training these models, right?
Right.
And what information are we training these models on, right? Are they being trained on, non-peer reviewed research like preprints?
Right.
And I know that I've certainly seen that happen in some large language models, treating them the same,
Right.
which I think could be very dangerous. And I think that in terms of, you know, if it can assist, early career researchers
Right.
in becoming better peer reviewers, I think there is an opening and an
Right.
opportunity for that.
Right.
I think that and what we've seen at Stacks is that early career researchers actually perform some of the best peer reviews, which
I,
is maybe contrary to what people might believe. And I think that that's because they are actually the most well versed in that information and in that study region, right?
right.
And they want to do a good job, right? Like they want to they believe in peer review,
Right.
they believe in giving back to their community. And so I think that there are ways to kind of integrate more of that training,
Hmm.
potentially through AI. I would actually push back though. I think that, most of that training is already occurring in university, right?
Right.
Under the guidance of a mentor, right? Or an
Right.
advisor. And, at Stacks, we've heard from many, many researchers that they like to do these reviews with their trainees, right?
Right.
Because it allows them to show how the peer review process works, how they can integrate that. And so I think there's an opening here,
Hmm.
right?
Right.
And I
Right.
think that, the goal is always to keep training better peer reviewers and bringing more people into being into the peer review platform. And I think that at Stacks, what we've seen is actually people who review for us come back time and time again
Hmm.
because they really enjoy the experience.
Right.
And so I think that when you give when you create a peer review process that people actually like, that they
Hmm.
find engaging, they're happy to go through that process. They're happy to learn from each other. And actually, that's one of the most common comments that we get from reviewers about why they like our collaborative model of peer review is because they actually get to learn from the other reviewers, right? So
Right.
instead of working in isolation, they can see each other's comments and they can say, oh, I hadn't even thought about that. Like that is helping me improve my own research. And so
Right.
it's fun to think of the peer review process as also being a learning one as well.
Right. 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 I think I might have some clarification in, or rather, for you as well as maybe for the listener. So when you talk
Mhm.
about what data a model is being trained on, right? So then you are looking at a specific type of application of artificial intelligence. So I guess you might be aware that our company, Inago, has a grammar checker or a writing assistant called Trinka. It's a leader in AI-based writing assistants, and that runs on a model that is trained on academic manuscripts, and we make sure that it can only receive what we believe is robust, like quality research text, so that it can then, for example, a new user is using it to improve their, let's say, how they write, how they express their research findings. It can provide the most, let's say, scientifically accurate grammar and language suggestions, right? So that is training. But there is another way of applying, just to use let's say, for example, a deep reasoning model. It can think like a human without all the nuances that our brain has, and can just look at, without any additional training, it with the right, let's say, technology like retrieval augmented generation, it can simply look at, let's say, a manuscript, a peer reviewed manuscript, and do a deep review of it, just like how a human would, but not at that level, but help the human with whatever they would be doing. So if suppose I were to assess a methodological section to see if everything checks out, if whatever they are saying that they've done also is done and presented in the results, and let's say we have supplementary methods, we have tables and everything, a human being does not have the sort of, I guess, the context window, which is an AI term, to keep all of this information together. But some of these more the larger language models can bring the information and present it to the reviewer, so that they can see, okay, if the methodology states that these two techniques were used, but maybe the results do not share the results of both the techniques. So some statistical detail is not mentioned, or maybe the statistical detail that is mentioned is not the same in the tables. And these are things that occasionally slip through the cracks in a regular peer review. And one of the goals for, I guess, many of the, let's say, technology brands that are trying to build AI assistants or scaffolding, you can use that term as well, is to sort of give that structure in terms of what a human peer reviewer would look for. And AI, let me know what you see, and you don't have to make any decisions. Just help the human find the right information so that they can make the right decision. So does that make sense to you, and does that sway your position in terms of, okay, are you still more open to potentially having an AI application to support reviewers?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting, right? And I think that this is why we're having this
Yeah.
discussion, right? Because I think it's complicated.
Yes.
I think it's one of these things that if you introduce a tool like that, I think like, do you think reviewers will actually think for themselves, right? Or will they just take what the AI says because they're overworked? They don't,
Yeah.
they don't want to give the time, and then they're like, cool, the AI says this, like I'm just going to submit that as the review.
Right.
And so excuse me. And so, I just have some deep concerns, right?
Right.
And I think until we see it in practice,
Mm.
I will be hesitant to
Right.
give an endorsement of something like that.
Well,
I think, and I think that there could be opportunities in the future,
right.
right? And I think that what we should actually be thinking about, I think that these AI tools are really coming about because the system of peer review is breaking down,
Right.
right?
Right.
And
Right.
we're reaching for things to help make it easier to get research through some level of credibility check. And I think like for my perspective and our perspective at Stacks is actually that like people want a peer review,
Hmm.
right? And people, believe that peer review is an important part of science. We want our own research to be peer reviewed. We want our trainees to research to be peer reviewed. We want the research that we're building our own research off to have been peer reviewed, to show that
Right.
it's credible, to show that it's trustworthy.
Right.
And so, our perspective is really to like zoom out and like, well, let's think about what the problems are, the really deep problems with peer review before we jump to some solution
Hmm.
that isn't actually meeting the issue, because the AI will probably also have its own
Right.
bias, right?
Yes.
And
Yes.
will, based on how the training data are being used. And so, we actually view peer review as being a great educational opportunity and a great way to bring more
Mhm.
community together and to collaborate, which are all things that scientists love to do. And
Right.
so at Stacks, our perspective is really like, how can we create a future of peer review that is really scientist focused,
Hmm.
that is really collaborative and built to create better science? And there potentially is in the future an opportunity for AI to kind of
Right.
support those things. But I think for us, it's like we actually just want to remodel peer review to
Hmm.
make it more modern and more streamlined and actually work for this moment, with human
Right.
scientists. Yeah.
Right, right, right. So excellent answer. So I think I have three follow-up points here. For the first question that I'd like to ask you, I've been meaning to ask you since you brought up the five reviewer thing in Stacks.
Yeah.
Do you use a structured peer review model, or is it like a okay? Well, how is a peer review in Stacks? Could you
Yeah,
explain? Yeah.
great. It's a good question. So,
Yeah.
when we get a manuscript submission, we gather a group of reviewers who have
Mm.
expertise in the field, and they have to have published peer-reviewed articles, and they have to be, show some level of expertise on that subject matter. We average about five, but
Mm.
we can have up to seven,
Right.
which I know for a lot of listeners might seem like a lot of reviewers. Um, but what's really unique about Stacks is that whole peer review happens in a single document.
Right.
And that is where you have these discussions, where you have these reviewers interacting. And so in our process, it's twofold. We send the article to the reviewers for a 2 week period for them to review on their own. So that's for them to develop their own independent ideas, for them to take some time to read through that article. And then there's a 2 week period where that document is live. And they are able to log in and out of that document using an anonymous login. So it's all double blind, to reduce bias, and they can see each other's comments, right?
Right. Right.
And so at the end of that 2 week period, there is a structured peer review form that they fill out.
Right.
And so this is asking about, ethics. This is asking about specific things in the method, specific things in the story, things like that. And that's actually where they vote on whether or not the article needs
Right.
more peer review, or just needs minor revisions, or if it should actually be rejected. And so for us, we really want it to be a community decision on what is getting published. We don't want any single reviewer to really
Right.
carry more weight than any other, which helps increase inclusion, and allow for diverse backgrounds to also be a part of this. And so for an article to be published, more than 70% of the reviewers have to say that it's ready to go.
Mm.
And we have that pretty strict threshold
Right.
because we want to show that peer review creates a marker of trust, credibility, that the research published in Stacks Journal is up to a certain quality. And then, we really believe in transparency. So, I think in typical journals, most reviewers are anonymous. If you're lucky, maybe they'll choose to sign their name. But in Stacks Journal, we actually post all of the peer reviews with every article, and we
Uh,
disclose the names of every reviewer.
right.
And so you can see what comments they had.
But
And then
not
we also,
not who
oh,
said what, or is it a can you like for example, if you and I were reviewing, could people see what you wrote versus what I wrote?
right now, the technology we have allows people to see the answers to that structured peer review form at the
Right.
end.
Right. Right.
But all of the line comments and all of those specific things within the actual peer review document, those are still blinded.
Okay. Okay.
Um,
Got it.
yeah, and so it's important for us to reveal those names, at the end, because we think that creates more constructive experience, right? And we
Yeah.
think that when your name is going to be listed, you might be a little more careful about like how you refer to these authors or refer to this research. And I think that what we've seen is actually there is a much more congenial attitude in the
Right.
peer review process. I think people are coming there to collaborate. They're
Right.
coming there to help impact their field and to learn from each other.
Right.
And I think it's been really exciting because we know who all of the reviewers are.
Right.
They don't know who each other are, but we see early career researchers getting responses from late career researchers and being like, "This is a great point," and it's
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
I know
Yes.
that. I've heard from early career researchers that feel like this is helping them get over some of that imposter syndrome as well, right? Like,
Right.
oh, people believe in me and I know what I'm talking about here.
Right. Right.
Um, and so, yeah, that's kind of the overview of our peer
Okay.
review process.
Excellent. So you already covered one other follow-up question about the transparency and the acts. I guess can the final reader. I mean, I know that authors can read everything in detail, obviously, and I guess the readers in this case can also see who has commented on what. So that's excellent. I feel that all of I guess the discourse on what makes an article submitted article eventually becomes that gold standard published one is very important context that gets lost in the traditional peer review system. So that's
Hmm.
wonderful that what Stacks is doing. So let me ask you this is the last of the follow-up question. So you mentioned that the AI could also have the same biases that a human could have. The perfectly valid point. And in fact, I would argue that the AI biases are even stronger because we still do not understand some of the systems. But what if AI could critique and surface evidence for and against what a human reviewer has put forth as a, let's say, a review comment? Would you be more comfortable with that?
I would love a clarification. Are you saying that you're having the AI review the peer review?
Yes, but not on the broad category. Like let's talk about something more specific. Let's say, if, for example, you might have heard of several like AI brands having reference verification technologies, which obviously index and use like metadata which has been vetted by, let's say, Crossref and everything. So let's say one of the questions that the peer reviewers are trying to answer is the literature review exhaustive and it's up to date, right? This is a question.
Mhm,
So if one reviewer says, okay, this looks great and I cannot see any better references, but if a reviewer sorry, if the AI assistant can actually surface something more recent that the reviewer has literally not seen because it is maybe
mhm.
published in the last week or so, wouldn't that improve the quality of the peer review, and wouldn't that make the entire sort of goal that Stacks has in terms of making the scientific peer review more robust and transparent? Wouldn't that be a good thing?
Yeah, I can see that being a great a great use of AI. I
Yeah.
think that as we all know, the volume of science is continuing to increase at a
Yes.
massive pace. And so, I think that for most researchers, what that has forced us to do is become really narrow in our focus, right? And
Right.
we are able to stay up on the research in our specific little niche, and so it makes it hard to maintain that. And so I do see that that could be a great application
Right.
to help with references, to help with literature cited. But I think that one of the things that is still important is that when people are, reading articles or creating new research, right? Like they're performing their own judgment as well,
Mhm.
right? So
Right.
when we are writing scientific articles, we are peer reviewing the peer reviewed literature of what we want to include,
Hmm.
right? And cite and bring into our own science.
Right.
And so, I think that there is some judgment there as well, right? And
Hmm.
so like I would worry that AI might be, saying like, oh, well, you have to cite this article because it came out 2 weeks ago, but
Right.
the reviewer or but the author's like, actually, maybe I don't want to cite that article because I know that it's not valid for certain reasons.
Right, right, right. So that's perfectly fine. The reviewer still obviously has a final say in it, and that's
Right.
at least my motto. If I were to be the sole decision maker in an AI peer review assistant, it is purely for assisting and making sure that the reviewer is able to do the best job that they can do in whatever way that works for them and for that
Yeah.
community. So that's always there. Now, I have a related question would be that do you think? I mean, I know this because there have been articles about it, but everybody, including reviewers, are using AI tools in one way or the other. So, what do you have? Well, what are your thoughts on how reviewers may be using AI technology without disclosing it and maybe using them, I would say, non-permissibly in the sense ethically that there's an ethical boundary that one should or should not do in terms of peer review and using copyrighted proprietary content of a researcher putting into, let's say, an AI to help them do their review. And there is enough evidence to suggest that a lot of research, I mean, reviewers are using it. So what are your thoughts on this? And is there any concern that you see maybe in Stacks or other journals that this might be there? And what are your thoughts on it?
Mhm. Yeah, I mean, I think that this gets back to the big problem here, right?
Yeah.
Which is that like the peer reviewers are overburdened, and it's a system that they don't feel excited to participate in,
Yeah.
right?
Mm.
And I think that Sachs is really operating from an abundance mindset, which is
Right.
that there are many scientists out there who want to do peer review, who want to be a part of this, who want to collaborate on new science and help impact their field, right?
Right.
And so, our perspective is very much that like if when you create a system for peer review that people want to engage in, they are
Mhm.
happy to do it, and they are happy to do it in a rigorous way without the use of AI.
Right.
And because our system is this collaborative document setup, it is harder for reviewers to just like
Mhm.
copy paste everything into an AI
Yes.
chatbot and say like, "Cool, tell me what to say here," because it's really discussion based, right?
Yes.
You
Yes.
see these reviewers picking out a specific line and saying like, "Oh, you cited this article, but I don't think that that's appropriate. You should cite this article instead." You have another reviewer who says like, "That's great, but have you thought about this?"
Mm.
And so
Yeah.
it's like it's a much more interactive experience. Um, which is why, we keep having these reviewers come back time and
Mm.
time again.
Right.
I even had an author who was working on their own article for us, and they were like, well, every time you send out a new review request, I want to do it because I just love it so much.
Right. Right.
It's like they really love learning from each other. And so, I think that there there are concerns when
Mm.
we see these journals that are that are publishing research coming out of like paper mills or
Right.
predatory journals who don't care about the peer review or the quality of the peer
Right.
review. They just want to publish, right?
Right.
And I think this kind of gets back to that the big picture, which is that peer review and scientific publishing has really been taken over by big money interests, right?
Yes.
And
Yes.
not to create good science. And so, at Stacks, we're really working to create a system that scientists actually feel good participating in, that they
Right.
want to participate in, that they want to help, shape their fields. And so, when I think about your question of like, what do we do? When we know that people are using AI in their peer reviews, like how do we monitor that? How do we
Right.
safeguard that? And I think it's to create a system where they want to be their authentic selves, where they want to show up, where they don't
Right.
feel like they're, giving lip service to one of the big publishers,
Right.
right?
Right. Right.
Um, where they actually want to collaborate, where they actually want to bring their knowledge and interact with their colleagues.
Right. So we covered a lot of the peer review related things, and we could continue talking about peer review yeah, and everything that you're doing, the wonderful work that we're doing. But I'm also aware of time, and we cannot have like a 2 hour podcast as well. So I'm going to shift to some of the other points. I really want to talk about the reproducibility negative evidence publishing angle that you brought about, and in the context of peer review, is there something that you can expand on and your vision as to how scholarly publishing to move should move ahead in let's say 2025.
Yeah, totally. Well, I think, there's I want to start by just saying that, there's a lot of really great research out there that is not getting published, right?
Right.
So, or getting not getting peer reviewed and published, right? I think the estimates are that 50 to 70% of solid research is not getting published.
Right.
And I think that this is due to a lot of reasons that are systemic to our system of peer review, right? It's expensive, it's biased. You can really only publish the splashiest results. And I think that these all hold science back and they hold back our societies as well.
Right.
And, I think it's probably no surprise then why, 30% of scientists across disciplines think that peer review needs a complete overhaul,
Right.
right?
Right.
Like it's a staggering statistic. Um, and so, I think for us at Stacks, like we are really trying to lift up all science, no matter how splashy it is, as long as it's credible. And so we really put a priority on, publishing negative results,
Right.
data sets, those that research that is really important can make an impact.
Hmm.
That is not typically accepted in other journals. And we allow authors to submit articles in as short as 2 pages.
Hmm.
So, which could be great for like a negative result or a data set or just like a new method or a new primer, something that they want to share that will help impact their field and that they want to get recognition for.
Right. Right.
Because I think that, we know that research is getting published at such a rapid rate now. But it's not inclusive,
Hmm.
right? And if you can't afford to publish or pay thousands and thousands of dollars
Right.
to get your research out, then you're not going to be able to share it, which is such a tragedy. We've
Hmm.
lost so much research, and so at Stacks, we're really trying to create an inclusive and accepting system that allows for not just the splashy results to be published, but also those negative results and
Right.
those data sets as well.
Right. So, a quick follow up to this: does tax offer some amount of remuneration or recognition, reviewer credits type of thing? And is that one of the reasons why reviewers come back to Stacks?
It's a good question. So for us, we offer recognition for reviewers. So what happens is at the end of the peer review process, if you think that the article is ready to be published, you can opt in to be listed as a collaborator on the article. And this is
Right.
a line just below the authors.
Right.
And so we want to give them that recognition and we want them to be a part of that research, right?
Right.
When we think about the best peer reviewers, they are truly collaborators,
Hmm.
right? They are truly helping improve that research, find new blind spots, help make it better for the authors. And the authors believe in this, right? We've had authors come back time and time again and say that this process has dramatically improved my research, right? More than I've seen in typical journals where the reviewers are working in isolation because
Right.
of that discussion, right? Because
Right.
we're creating these interactions among reviewers. And so we want to recognize reviewers. So we give them that opportunity to be listed as a
Mm.
as a collaborator. And that's something they can put on their CV and something that they can use to help advance their career as well.
Right, 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 right. Okay, so again, we are totally like over time, but I still want to ask you a couple of quick questions. What, in your opinion, is okay in the context of AI assistance in, let's say, peer review in 2025? We are talking the 21st of May, 2025. So, can you quickly summarize what is okay, what is not okay?
I think for me, it's just that so at this point, I don't believe that AI is really capable of sound scientific judgment, right?
Okay.
And so, like, I think it can be used to help fix grammar or check for plagiarism or
Mm,
things that, might be too hard for a human to do.
right.
But I don't think they should be evaluating the quality or the
Mm,
novelty of science.
right,
I
right,
think that there's so much nuance there, and I think that is something that really humans are most capable of doing.
right, right,
And and so I think that's kind of my current stance, right?
right,
And
right.
I think as AI continues to grow and
Mm,
evolve and change, I think that could shift. But I think for me, it's really trying to understand how these AI models are being trained. How are they being created? What are the guardrails? And what information is actually being brought into them?
right,
Are
right.
they bringing in any scientific knowledge that they can find on the internet,
Mm,
or does that also include non-peer reviewed preprints
right, right. Got
or
it.
articles that haven't gone through peer review? And so I think that's kind of where I'm at. I
Mhm.
think and I think that there's a danger of trying to integrate it too quickly
Mm.
before we actually try to reform peer review to make it work better
Right.
again.
Right, right. Okay, great. So, we also talked about, let's say, reviewer training for early reviewers, reviewer matching, maybe find out things about, like, for example, is the methodology sufficiently detailed for replicability, reproducibility? These are some of the strengths that I'm aware that the current let's say, machine learning models are capable of doing if you have the right infrastructure. So, and we obviously have to talk about screening in terms of helping the journal editors. So, are you more comfortable with the current state of technology for editorial screening in terms of whatever we can do, including obviously the research integrity related flags that we all need? What are your thoughts on editorial, let's say, assistance for editorial reviews?
Yeah, I mean, I think that it could be helpful for finding reviewers, right?
Right.
I
Yeah.
think that when we get new articles, when you're finding for any journal, right? When you're finding reviewers and trying to find people who have the expertise in the field, I think that there could be as AI assisted technology here that could
Hmm.
be helpful to help,
Right.
pull together a batch of reviewers who
Right.
have expertise, who are credible and have been vetted.
Mm.
And so I do think that is possible. I think in terms of, an editorial check, um, I would have concerns to make sure that it's like not actually assessing the quality of the research or the novelty of the
Mm.
research.
Right. Right.
But
Right.
I think it could probably screen to say, like, is there an abstract? Is
Right.
there
Right.
a discussion?
Right.
Right? Are there figures? Do they look legible? Those
Hmm.
types of questions
Right.
that, I think is great for an AI assisted opportunity. But I think we have to be really cautious when it moves into assessing the quality or novelty of research, because I
Right.
think that is something that really should be done by human observers.
Right, right. So, at this point, I think I'll have to tell you what I'm working on with the product team at Inago and Trinka. So, if our concept is basically a peer review assistant workspace, and what we want to give is more or less, you can think of it as a scaffolding using the structured peer review questionnaire that many journals use. So, currently we are in the prototype stage. So, what we are helping reviewers do is to find the relevant information to any of the structured peer review questions that they might find it difficult because it's a long manuscript, right? So those that evidence is shown to a reviewer, and the reviewer can verify and validate or obviously rebut in if it's not if the AI surfacing information is not accurate. So this is simple in the sense that you have to just look at a manuscript. But when it goes to things beyond, for example, reference validation, or is the cited research relevant, and if, is the study novel and everything, we are working on the what I would say that extra manuscript related information. And so this is where again the training aspect, and there is no concept of training in this. What we will have to do at that point in time is to go out of the manuscript and look at metadata in the indices, like for example Crossref or OpenAlex, and find all the relevant information, again bring it to the attention of the reviewer. So if suppose, for example, in the case of are the citations relevant, there would could be more citations. The AI simply is saying that, look, is this is another thing that you might want to consider, or maybe this one has been retracted. So do you want to still consider, as in, do you want to give critique to the author that they have cited retracted papers, or would you want to change something about that? So these sort of assistance is what the AI would give you. And apart from, obviously, this is a scaffolding, everything that is being done on the platform would be transparent. And finally, the data of the manuscript is not going anywhere, but it is basically being processed using a locally deployed secure. And we are very passionate about data security and intellectual property. So it's only being processed by many locally deployed models. And there are even features that we call, it's like an AI consensus, in the sense that there could be multiple models evaluating the same questions from different angles. So there could be different perspectives, just like how five reviewers could have different perspectives. All of this from a review point of view. If you want a publisher can choose, if you like the question that I asked you, the human can perform the review first and the AI can critique it, or at least support the reviewer in terms of providing more or less information that the reviewer could use to improve their comment, apart from assistance like grammar checking and everything. And from a publisher point of view, we are also ensuring that, let's say, you might find this interesting, that you would know how the reviewer has done, as in what references that they have, or what published research, not preprints, published research that they've accessed to validate some of the claims. All such details would be available, again, for transparency. So it is for the publisher to decide whether they want to publish it or not, but all whatever the reviewer has done or supposedly has to do could be made available for in the context of, let's say, hygiene and transparency and everything. So this is the vision that we have, and we are very excited. In fact, in the SSP conference in this week and next week, we are presenting it in a session, and we've had very good responses so far in terms of it's different from some of the other things that we have seen. As you also would agree, we want to make sure that the scientific peer review, it's cracking, and we want to somehow support it as much as we can using responsible AI. And so I hope that that makes sense to you. Okay, one last question before we wind up. What do you think of AI assistants in general? I guess you might have kept up with the STM associations, the terminology in terms of AI assistants, in terms of listing, okay, what type of AI assistants can or cannot be done. We have discussed a lot this, as well as, if you're an author or a researcher, what should you disclose in your manuscript? Because there are different types of AI used there. So what are your thoughts on those?
I think that more transparency is always better, right? And so I think that is the disclosures of what kinds of assistive technology you've used, I think is really important. And I think that when we talk about AI, I think that looking for like plagiarism checks or understandings of what parts of the manuscript are either copying or plagiarizing other work, I think that that's really important. Or if they have used a chatbot or something to help draft some parts of their manuscript, I think that it gets into like a bit of a gray area,
Yeah.
right? And so like I think that there we know people are using AI to help draft their manuscripts or structure their manuscripts or things like that. We know that that's out there, right? And I think that we need to be as transparent as possible and to encourage authors and reviewers to also be as transparent as possible
Right.
here. And so yeah, I think it's complicated. I don't think there's like an easy answer.
Right.
And I think that we're still trying to understand what the impacts are. for scientific publishing and for peer review. But I think that, in our experience, the authors who have come to the stacks are really excited about this collaborative review and are really excited about sharing their research and
Mm.
as genuinely as they possibly can. And
Right.
so I think that there is a little, people are a little scared and a little nervous about how much AI is getting
Mm.
integrated into scientific publishing. And so I think that my big takeaway is that we need to wait cautiously and that we need to increase transparency.
Right, right. So, in a nutshell, you would want more transparency and more disclosures explaining what is it that a researcher has or hasn't done,
Mhm.
which is great. Okay, I also agreed to that. So now, we are at the end of the podcast. So this was such an entertaining, informative. I said I learned a lot from to think about the AI assistants in the academic publishing space from somebody who does not obviously share my thoughts on how things should be, which was very insightful. And I'm sure that our listeners would also have gained some knowledge and perspectives in terms of how they can view it. So before I leave you, David, what would you like to talk about something that you are currently working on or your social media or something like that?
Yeah, totally. Well, I'm the founder of Stacks Journal, and have started that, from my own frustrations in peer review and wanting to help get research out more streamlined and create a peer review process that actually works for researchers. And so, I'm excited about the peer review process that we built, that actually makes peer review engaging and interesting and interactive and that people really love.
Right,
And so, I think that I would love, if people are curious about us, they can learn more about on our website at stacksjournal.org.
right,
It's also where you can sign up to become a reviewer and to experience this new model of collaborative peer review.
right.
And yeah, I would just encourage you to take a look because I think that, we are growing pretty rapidly and people are really enjoying the processes that we've built. And so I would encourage your listeners to take a look and to learn more about Stacks Journal.
Well, I will definitely be taking a deeper look. I've already done some research, and I was fascinated by the two-page article because I think science should not be, withheld because of some structure that somebody came up in a boardroom or something like that. So that's also something that I relate to. So I would also like so whoever has joined us, thank you for your time and attention. We hope that you have enjoyed the conversation that David and I had regarding AI assistance and ethics and everything. And once again, would like to remind you that we are currently streaming this live on LinkedIn and YouTube. So if you're watching us there, please subscribe to the channel and hit the bell notification icon if you like the content. And we would love to have you share this content with your colleagues and friends. And if you want to share feedback, you can do that either on LinkedIn or YouTube. Maybe you can share feedback for David as well. So that'll be wonderful, and he will know something that you think about how Stacks Journal is and what it could do. And also, if you want to find more about our work, search for Research and Beyond on any of the social media platforms, and you'll find us there under Inago. And you can share feedback. We'd also like you to subscribe to our channel so that we can keep you updated on the latest developments. Especially, we are passionate about ethical use of technology in the field of publishing, as David is. So with that, this is the end of the episode. David, once again, thank you for taking time out on a wonderful morning. I'm sure it is spring, I think, right? Spring in Portland, Oregon. Yeah. So thank you for joining us, and we thank everybody for joining us, and stay tuned for such content. And this is Dr. KK signing goodbye. Bye, David.